Disclaimer: Jonestown was a very real tragedy, so this video will be a little more serious than the rest. Because killing kids ain't cool. God damn it! Born in May of 1931, Jim Jones was born to a Great War veteran who suffered from war-related illnesses and a neglectful mother. Growing up during the Great Depression, Jim Jones had a tough childhood to say the least, compounded by the fact that he was also the town weirdo. As a kid, he was known for having obsessions with Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler, claiming that he could fly, and forcing other kids to attend mock funerals for dead animals. Some animals which he allegedly killed himself. It was a cat. But this information is coming from Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt. Already off to a great start. During his college years, Jim Jones was known for being mega religious despite being publicly an atheist. Though it was pretty easy for him to be religious since he just picked and chose which parts of the Bible he wanted to believe in. He specifically held a great interest in the Pentecostal church, being fascinated by their semi-communal ways of living. The reason why was because Jones saw Christian communalism as a way of spreading Marxist values to the American public. You see, his obsession with contemporary dictators never went away, if not he was more enamored by them. He specifically held great interest in communist figures, having read the works of Marx and Engels. Though, much like his devotion to religion, Jones just picked and chose which parts of their teachings and writings he wanted to believe in, so not too dissimilar from a modern communist. But despite the fact that he had a very rudimentary understanding of communism, the claim that he wasn't a devout communist would be a lie. During the Korean War, he was an outspoken critic of the US's role in the defense of South Korea, arguing that North Korea's invasion was actually a liberation. Sometime between the late 1940s and early 1950s, he joined the very unfortunately named CPUSA, not NAMBLA, the Communist Party of the USA, but there's very little difference between the two.
Flatly didn't look like Lolly. I don't give a shit. Cope, Diamond, I just don't care.
By 1951, Jim would set up the People's Temple in Indianapolis, Indiana. And while technically it was a sect of Christianity, it wasn't really, because Jim believed that Jesus was nothing more than a paper idol who must be destroyed, and that he was the real God. Also, the temple was a front to preach communism, so once again, already off to a great start. Oh yeah, on top of all of this, Jim Jones was still publicly an atheist, who happened to be an ordained reverend of his own church, in which he preached that he was God. As you can see, this was someone who had a very deep and intellectual understanding of their own ideology and philosophy. Time for a political career. In 1961, Jones was given the top position in the Human Rights Commission by former Indianapolis Mayor Charles Boswell, which was strange to say the least because Mayor Boswell was a part of the right-wing faction of the Democrats. How could an open communist gain a position in a conservative administration? Because Mayor Boswell couldn't give two shits to do a simple background check. Jim Jones was quick to take advantage of the publicity he was garnering from his new position, taking the opportunity to advertise his church and double down on racial issues. The campaign attracted local African-American youths to his congregation, though this only lasted for around 2 months as Boswell told Jones to politely shut the fuck up. Jim himself didn't even make it through his entire term due to his paranoia about the impending nuclear holocaust. The following year, Jim and his family left the US to move to Brazil. The Jones family didn't even make it to Brazil, stopping at Georgetown, Guyana, just to return to Indianapolis another year later. In 1965, Jones finally found a place to isolate his followers. Survive the nuclear apocalypse, relocating himself and around 160 of his followers to the agrarian community of Ukiah, California. Now, on one hand, Ukiah's racial relations greatly improved as it used to be known as a bit of a sundown town, and most of Jones's followers were black. On the other hand, this was when all the abuse and horror stories about the cult started, because Jim Jones, who was referred to as the Messiah at this point, went mad with power. The reason why was because Jones transformed his pseudo but not really Christian cult into a political machine. It kinda always was a political machine because it was a front to preach communism, but now it had political leverage, and the newfound control over his followers and the influence in California politics was quick to get into Jones's head. According to a 1972 investigative article written by future White House correspondent Reverend Lester King Sullivan, by 1972 in Ukiah, California, a town of just over 10,000 residents, 4,700 of them reported to be connected to the People's Temple, and with such a high percentage of the town being a part of the cult, Jones's influence was able to infiltrate every level of local enterprise and, more importantly, civic government. There were members in local law enforcement, the sheriff's office, the grand jury, the district attorney was a member, we'll get back to him later, and most concerningly, Modesto County Welfare Services. Jones's takeover of welfare services meant that he had control over child custody services, and that he basically had a constant supply of literal kids he could indoctrinate into his ideology. Now back to the district attorney, a guy named Timothy Stowen. According to the Reverend, this guy was legally approving marriages which involved a minor. Now, being fair in judgment, there's nothing in the Reverend's writings which stated or insinuated that Jones approved nor disapproved of child marriages. There is no concrete evidence that Jones was a pedophile, except for the fact that he posed with children. A lot. But there is a lot of evidence that Jones abused the kids who were a part of the cult. According to the Reverend's investigation, in one incident, Jones forced a sick child who vomited during a communal meal to eat his own vomit. Jones also made made kids go through survival training, which consisted of throwing kids and teenagers with nothing but a bathing suit and occasionally a life jacket into a freezing river in the middle of the night and keeping them exposed to the elements until the following day, during the cold season in Northern California. But kids weren't just potential super soldiers for the post-apocalypse, they were also an extremely helpful tool to keep certain members who were seen as loose cannons to toe the line. Since Jim practically controlled child services, the Messiah taketh what the Messiah giveth, your kids. He had two ways of going about this, using his influence in welfare services to legally repossess them, or forcing the parents into a non-consensual divorce, and using their child as a pawn against them. Yet despite all of the rampant child abuse, publicly the People's Temple had an extremely positive reputation throughout California. Due to financially abusing their own members by demanding 25% of each member's earnings go to the church, the temple had a massive surplus of money. With this surplus, Jones decided to use his church's excess of wealth for philanthropy, which would heavily resemble lobbying. I say this because many of the charities he donated to were extremely political in nature, such as an organization for grieving widows of fallen police officers, the NAACP, neo-Nazi organizations, and San Francisco mayoral candidate George Moscone. Oh, yeah. The money also went to several offshore bank accounts under Jones's name, which according to the New York Times were in total worth around $10 million in late 1978, or about $47.3 million today. But back to mayoral candidate George Moscone, because the way he won the 1975 election was bullshitty. As hard as it is to believe, San Francisco was a bit of a swing city, between moderate Republicans and the liberal wing of the Democratic establishment, so the race was a genuine toss-up. Democratic candidate Phil Burton saw the People's Temple, which had a bit of notoriety in the city, as a way to tip the scales in the Democrats' favor. So he set up direct connections between Jones and Moscone, who were extremely amicable with one another due to both being championed as civil rights leaders. The election came and went, but it was too close to call, so the election became a runoff. During the runoff election, Jones bussed in hundreds of his followers from Ukiah and some members who lived as far away as Los Angeles into San Francisco to vote in the election. The fraudulent voters were also instructed to vote multiple times. As Jones put it when recalling the events during an interview, "We loaded up all 13 of our buses with maybe 70 people on each bus, and we had those buses rolling non-stop up and down the coast into San Francisco the day before the election. We had people going from precinct to vote. Surprise! Moscone won the mayoral office. Another person who gained a position in public office in the 1975 election was a guy named Harvey Milk, someone who also happened to have a really close relation with Jones due to symbiotic benefits. You see, Milk provided Jones access to the American elite, with Jones fostering connections with the California governor, Jerry Brown, at the time First Lady Rosalind Carter, at the time Vice President Walter Mondale, and future San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown, someone who would become a political mentor for Kamala Harris, the current U.S. Vice President. In exchange, Jones used his influence to lobby for gay rights issues. This wasn't some grifting thing either. Jones was extremely supportive of the LGBTQ community, as long as he got rid of the LBT and Q. One incident reported by the New West recounts the story of Linda Myrtle, who was caught doing some gay shit with another girl. As punishment, Linda was beaten an estimated 75 times with a wooden paddle in front of a congregation of 600 people, including her family. Mind you that at the time she was only 15. Oh yeah, I just want to address this before moving on. Harvey Milk had a special relation with a 16-year-old boy named Jack Galen McKinley while he was 33. Though if you mention this, you are an ignorant person. Not my words, Gavin Newsom's. But it wasn't just the politics that was getting to Jones's head. He was also falling for his own religious preachings, despite the fact that he was still publicly an atheist, who told his followers to use the Bible as toilet paper. In between all of the homilies where he was praising communism, atheist ideas, and gloating about how many women he fucked that day, Jones had a couple of religious-ish sermons where he preached about the true savior, himself. Jones claimed to have had a myriad of abilities. He stated himself to have been a holy healer who could get rid of cancer by surgically removing random parts of your skin and then claiming that it was cancer. He was also directly responsible for 40 resurrections across the California coastline. Though who he specifically resurrected has never been identified, he claimed to have had telepathic powers and could read people's minds. Jones accomplished this by having his followers write letters to the Messiah with all their deepest, darkest secrets, which he could use for public humiliation.
Hey, Taylor, remember that thing you told me in confidence that I'm now revealing in front of all your peer group? How about now? How's it going now?
He also proved this ability by estimating the value of a random woman's book collection down to the penny. This lady wasn't even connected to the cult or anything, she was just some random lady who lived in Los Angeles during the height of Jones's influence in California. And, to add that little extra cherry on top, was Jones's absolute depravity with drugs and sex. Ever wondered why he wore glasses all the time? It was because he took massive doses of quaaludes, pentobarbital, and painkillers on such a frequent basis that his eyes were an unnatural shade of red almost 24/7. As previously mentioned, many of his homilies were about his sex life. He also used his homilies to advertise himself to his members. Oh my god. Jones preached that having sex with him was actually a sacrifice on his end, as somehow screwing Jones kept you on the straight and narrow, which was ironic because he also fucked dudes and was arrested for it. There are two conflicting accounts on Jones's own homosexuality. One was from Los Angeles pastor Father David Wise. Father David claimed that in his experience with Jones that he was a genuine homosexual who was into dudes. The other account is from former cult member Laura Cole, who claimed that Jones had sex with men as a power move. As a bonus, thanks to Father David, we also know that Jones's crotch was riddled with herpes sores after Jones tried to make sexual advances on him. I had to read about it, and now you have to know about it. Jones also appointed a group of female secretaries for the People's Temple, who doubled up as Jones's personal harem of women. If for whatever reason the harem wasn't working out or no one paid him a visit after mass, he would sometimes coerce random members in for sex, non-consensually. Everything I have talked about, from the child abuse, the political conspiracies, his drug problems, and sex life, went on for 7 years. It wasn't until the hit piece published by the New West exposing Jones and the People's Temple for being a horrifying Charles Manson-style sex cult that Californians started to wake up. Unfortunately, before Jones could suffer any real consequences, he once again fled the US for Guyana, and headed for the Guyana commune of the People's Temple. In the jungles of Guyana, he would finally build his earthly utopia without the pesky interventions of the capitalist system and US government, except for child protection services. You see, the Guyana commune, which was now referred to as Jonestown, was less of a utopia and more of a gulag for children. Many of these kids were separated from their parents as a form of keeping their parents from trying to escape the cult. Basically, they were hostages. But now that Jones was weak, many of these parents started speaking out, demanding their children back, and this was referred to as the siege. Logically, Jones responded to these grieving parents by militarizing Jonestown and setting up a volunteer army. The cult also began White Nights, which were practices of ritualistic communal suicide. Any member who didn't comply was drugged into submission. Due to this and many more allegations of everything terrible in life, in the fall of 1978, California Congressman Leo Ryan, with a flurry of journalists, would fly down to Guyana to investigate Jonestown personally. After Ryan arrived and started asking questions, Jones would learn that many members were trying to escape with the congressman back to America. Jones's very reasonable, very rational reaction was to Following a failed attempt on the congressman, the visit was cut short. Ryan, the journalist, and members trying to escape the cult would leave back for the airport. Though right before they boarded the planes to leave, a party of Jonestown members ambushed Ryan's group. The members pulled their weapons, gunned down and killed Congressman Ryan, and as many in the group of escapees as they could. Following his post-nut clarity, Jones realized that he fucking killed an American congressman, which would be really bad once news reached Washington. So Jones, in his infinite wisdom, came to a second, very rational, very reasonable conclusion. Everyone has to kill themselves in the revolutionary suicide. So later that day, Jones served his congregation the now infamous cyanide Kool-Aid. Oh yeah! For whatever fucking reason, there's an audio tape recording of the cries of the first 300 or so members who succumbed to the poison. Jones himself didn't have to suffer as he was allowed the privilege to shoot himself. Even in death, this guy was a major dick. Everything I've mentioned in this video is only the surface level. I didn't talk about Timothy Stone's semi-redemption from approving child marriages, Jones allegedly trafficking his own members to the Guyanese government in exchange for favors, Walter Cronkite purposely lying about Jones's political ideology so the civil rights movement could save face, and
Jones being proclaimed a civil rights hero, comparable to Martin Luther King and Mao, as stated by Willie Brown. In reality, Jim Jones is more comparable to a figure like John Brown, a race-obsessed terrorist who did more harm to this country than good, yet one who has been absolved of all his sins due to liberals and leftists rewriting the narrative of American history in an effort to save face. If you want to learn more, I invite you all to check out my video, link will be in the description or the top right corner. The US of Z thanks you for watching. Mr. Z, out.